In this video, I'm going to be creating the Google homepage with HTML and CSS. This is another really good beginner project, and there are a few things to consider, especially regarding the layout, for which I'm going to be using Flexbox. So let's begin. I've got my files set up here. They're both blank at the moment, and this is my working document. I've also got my images folder with some of the assets that I'm going to be using. So in Sublime Text, which is what I'm using, and probably other editors as well, if I just type HTML and hit tab, I'm going to get this skeleton structure created for me. So then I can just start populating it. Now the title is Google, and then I can start working on the body section. So I'm going to build this up one stage at a time. So the first thing I want to do is build up this header section here. So we'll just declare a header tag, and within there I'm going to add a nav tag. So technically you could argue that's not really a nav bar in kind of the traditional sense, but at the same time it is sitting at the top of the page and it's got my navigation links. So I'm going to wrap it inside the nav bar as well. Now to add these links in, I'm going to create an unordered list. And then I will just create each of the links as a list item. So the first one is going to be my link, and that link is going to go nowhere, so I don't declare a location for it. And the link was about. So we close those two tags, and then just copy it down for the second link. The second one was store. So if I save that, and if I just turn on my browser sync, that will bring this up. There we go. So now I can see my two links coming up. Now, of course, they look nothing like what this page is supposed to look like, but we're going to style that in a second. So that's the first ones. That's the ones on the left. Because I've got them split to the left and the right of the screen, I'm going to declare them or create them as two separate unordered lists. So that's the first one done. Now we can do the second one. And I'm just going to copy this down, save me typing it all out again. Now the second batch of unordered list, well, that's going to have the same kind of structure. The first link was Gmail, and then the second link was images. Save that again, and there we go. And you can see actually there's a little gap here. And so this is what we're going to be using when I spread them out to the left and the right hand side of the screen. The fact that they are not one unordered list, but they're two, means that I can position them separately from each other. Next, I need to load in this little menu here, the bento menu here. So the way I'm going to do this is I'm going to carry on with my list items. I'll create it as a list item, but it's not actually going to be a link. This is just going to be an image. So I'll give this a class because I need to come back and style this separately. The class is going to be menu background. And then within this list item, I'm going to load in my image. So the image, let's see, I'm going to break this out over a few lines. So the image, first of all, is going to have a class. The class will be menu button. Then I need to give it the location of the file. So in my case, the file is in this images folder. So then I say images / menu.png, and that's this image here. So that's those buttons. And in fact, I'm going to hide this now just so I've got a little bit more space. So I'm getting very cramped. And then I'll give it an alt, which is just menu button. Okay, and then we close out, let's close it down here, close out that list item tag, and there you go. It's come up here. It's pretty big, but it's loaded in. The next one was the profile picture. So that little picture on the right. Now I'm just going to use a random picture, an open source one from Unsplash. So create another list item and another image. And again, I'll just break this out over a couple of lines. So this one's going to have a class of profile pic. And the source, well, I'm getting this one online. So it is source.unsplash.com. I just want a random picture. I don't really care what it's going to be. And then the size I will give of 30 by 30 pixels. And then let's just give it an alt of profile pic. Okay, close that one out. And then I can close out my list tag. And that's it. So that's my list item tag and my unordered list all closed out. So if I save this again, there we go. It's loaded in a tiny little picture for me there. Okay, so at the moment it's looking pretty terrible, but the content is there. I've got all the links that I needed. I've got the image, or I've got both of the images loaded in. Now I just need to start styling it to actually make it look like the real website. So this is where my style sheet comes in. Now before I can use this, I need to make sure that I'm linking it through my HTML document. So just up here before my title, I need to link it through. So I'll say link, and if I press tab, it just auto completes for me. So it's a style sheet, and the reference, well, That is style.css. There we go. So now I can start actually adding in my CSS in here. And the first thing I want to do is apply some CSS styling that just goes for the entire document. So I add this asterisk at the beginning, and there's just a few things that I want to apply to every element within this page. So these are things like margin. I set that to 0, and you'll notice when I save, everything shifts up and a little bit to the left. So all of these elements have a default margin, and I just override it. So this just sets it all to 0, and then I can adjust it as I need to on the individual items. I do the same with padding, set that to 0, and I adjust the box sizing. So we'll say box sizing is border box, save that. So you notice after I set margin and padding to 0, all of these items are now just bunched up into the top left corner. So that just shows how much default margin and padding there actually was. If I comment this out, you can see everything moves in again. Get rid of it and everything's bumped up. So it just means I'll be able to get finer control over each individual element. And let's also set a font size for the entire document. I'll go with 14 pixels. And I'll also set a color as my default. So I'm going to use this slightly grayish color for all of the text. Okay, so that applies some styling to all of the elements, and you can actually see already some of this has changed. But now I can start getting a little bit more specific and targeting these individual elements and classes. The first thing to do is work on this actual layout of the navbar. So everything at the moment is just laid out one on top of each other. It's in a, well, essentially that's the flow of this document. Now I want to change that flow so that everything is lined up horizontally. You could do this a few different ways. You could use floats. You can maybe change the block elements to inline, but you're going to have problems with the lists here and so on. So all of that is made much easier by just using Flexbox. Now I'm going to target my nav element because that's what contains my individual unordered lists. So within the nav element, all I've got is this unordered list and this unordered list. All of these other bits, they are children of those lists. So they don't get, if I make any changes to the nav element within my style sheet, it's not necessarily going to affect these in terms of the layout. It just looks at the children of it, direct descendants. So what I can do is say nav, first of all, let's change the display to flex. So this is what makes it a flex container. So by doing this, everything within it becomes a flex item. So they get laid out in a row. Simply because the flex direction by default is to take everything and just set it side by side. Rather than it being on top of each other, it goes left to right. And this is controlled by the flex direction. So what I could do is set this to column, and it puts it back to how it was. It stacks everything on top of each other. So I'm still using Flexbox, but I'm telling it stack things in a column. If I change it to row, it stacks them side by side, which if you'll notice, if I delete this, nothing changes. So that is the default value. It automatically defaults to flex direction of row. So you might be wondering why these things are still all stacked on top of each other. Well, remember, those are all children of the individual UL tag. So this part has worked correctly. It's basically said that everything that's within this nav element, well, that gets stacked side by side. But then whatever is inside those individual elements, I haven't addressed any of that yet. So that still gets stacked up on top of itself. So let's continue. What I need to do now is spread these two things to the left and the right hand side of the screen. This is where flex positioning comes in. So I can say justify content, and there's different options here. I could say center, that'll move everything straight to the middle of the page. Flex start and flex end. So flex end moves it to the right. Flex start was the default, I believe. It just moves it to the left. But what I'll use instead is a space between. And this spaces them out. So it just takes all the available space, puts the items on the left and right, and then fills it with what's left in the middle. So now you can see I've got them positioned as I needed them. So about and store are on the left, and then everything else is on the right. But now because I've overridden my padding, everything is right up against the edge of the screen. But in reality, it should kind of be brought in a little bit. So let's add padding here. Say padding of 20 pixels top and bottom, 10 pixels left and right. Okay, that's better. And then just give an overall height for this navbar. So I'll go with 60 pixels. And it's not actually changed anything at the moment, but I haven't really played around with the rest of the layout. So all of these things, they're just overfilling, spilling past my navbar. But if I inspect the element, you can see the navbar up here is coming up as 60 pixels. It's just that the contents are too big for it and they're flowing over it. So now we can start working on these individual lists. I've got the navbar set up, so the items are to the left and to the right, but then the unordered lists themselves, they are still stacking vertically. Well, all I need to do is target the unordered lists now. So I'm moving down a level. Now I'm going into the unordered lists, and each of them has its own children. So this one's got 2 li elements, and this one's got 4 li elements. So I can apply pretty much the exact same process I just did. I can go into my UL element, I can change the display to flex. Now remember what's going to happen here. Display flex by default, it has a flex direction of row. So that means that all of these are going to be arranged side by side instead of on top of each other. Save that, and there you go. Straight away, that's exactly what it's done. It's all bunched up against each other, but you can see all the elements, they're now in a row. We could put it back to how it was by saying flex direction column. And that's exactly how it was previously. So I'll get rid of this. And what I can do now is get rid of those bullets at the beginning. So list style, I'll set that to none. So that gets rid of my bullet points. And what I can also do with Flexbox is, apart from justify content, I can say align. So in this case, it's going to be align items. And I can say center. So what's happened here, if you notice there, everything is now, if I comment this back out, everything is now in a row. So it's basically lined up to the center of each of the elements. If I save this again with that commented out, that's not the case anymore. So put this back in and look at what happens. Everything's lined up perfectly in a row. So when I get the scaling of these elements sized up correctly, it just means that things aren't going to be up and down relative to each other. Everything's going to be lined up nicely on the horizontal axis. Okay, so that's everything I need to do for my UL element. Now I can start moving into the rest of the styling. So let's go into the elements individually. So the list item elements one by one. And first of all, text align. Now I'm not sure if this will work straight away, but I do want to align the text in the center of the element. Yeah, so right now it doesn't work because they're kind of too small. Or sorry, they're too big for the element that they're in. So let's add some padding. 14 pixels top and bottom, 20 pixels left and right. There we go, that's spaced it out quite a bit more now. And now let's get rid of that underline. So I'll target the A, essentially all of the links on this page. I don't want any of them to have an underline. So we'll just say text decoration becomes none. And there we go. So that's looking still not exactly the same, but it's looking a lot closer to the actual Google page now. But the one thing you notice here is when I hover over, the underline does come back in. Now I've gotten rid of the underline completely. So I need to add that back in when it hovers. So we'll say that all the links within the list items, I need to add hover here. So whenever we hover any of the links that are within the list items, then we need to add that text decoration back in, the underline text decoration. Save that, and there we go. It's back in now, so I can hover over these and I get a little underline. Okay, so that's coming together. Now, the other thing to notice is the text here is bigger than the text on this side. So these two links are actually a little bit smaller than the rest of the document. So what I'm going to do here is add an individual class to both of those items. So we go back to the HTML document, and these are the two list items. So what I can do here is add an additional class to them. So I'll say A, and before the link, I will add a class, which will just be called small-text. And I can copy it down to the one below it. So I'm only going to style it once, but it's going to apply it to everything that has this class. So in my case, that's these two links. So let's go back to the CSS and add that in. So just underneath here. Now to target a class, I would use a full stop and then say small text. And the font size here is just going to be based on the overall document size. So I'm going to be using rem instead of pixels, and I'll just say 0.9 rem. So it's going to be 90% of the root document or the HTML font size. So if I save this now, you see those both shrank a little bit and the font dropped. Okay, so the links are all looking fine, but this still looks absolutely terrible. It's far too big for the page. So let's start working on that. Now, if I go back in here, remember there was actually a couple of classes that I added on. So this is the section that captures that button. I've got a class for the list item of menu background, and then the image itself has also got a class, which is the menu button. So you can't see the menu background right now. That's deliberate, but you can see the menu button, which is the picture itself. Now, why have I done it this way? Well, if I start styling both of them, it will become apparent. So we'll say menu background first of all. We'll style that. And actually, just to visualize what's going on, let's give it a background color. This is just temporary. I will delete this, but let's just say background color of red. And there you go. So you can now at least see what's going on in the background here. So we got background color of red. I need to set a size for this. Width of 40 pixels, height of 40 pixels. Okay, so you see the image hasn't changed, but the little placeholder for it has, and it's actually looking about the right size. So now let's do the same thing for the menu image. So say menu, so that was the background, menu button. Let's style that. It's going to be a lot smaller, so width of 15 pixels. You can't actually see it because of this update, but there you go. It's grown a lot smaller. The height I didn't need to adjust. That's done automatically. It just maintains that the aspect ratio, so it shrinks the height by the same amount. So the buttons are looking the right size. And now I can explain why I added this menu BG in the first place. So if I get rid of this color and wait for that to disappear. Okay, so it looks pretty much the same as what we've got here. But notice when I hover, I get this little gray backdrop to it. So that is missing here. And that's what I wanted to add in. That's why I have this menu background class. So what I can actually do here is I'm not going to have a background within the class itself, but I will add a hover state to it. So just like I've done with the links here, which give me an underline when I hover, I can do the same with the menu button. So I can say menu button on hover, we set a background color to it. So say my background color is going to be, I'll use an RGBA value. So this means that I can add some opacity to it. So it's going to be a little bit transparent. The color will be 100, 100, 100. And I will start with 1 just to demonstrate what's going on. I will also set the cursor to a pointer. So now when I put my mouse over it, it's going to go to turn to this little hand. And there you go. You can kind of see this background appearing there. But I was just wondering why it was so small. And it's because I've styled the wrong thing. So it's not menu button, it's menu BG, menu background. Try that again. Yeah, okay, that's a lot better. That's what I was trying to do. So I've got this working, but because it's not at all transparent, it's a solid color, it overrides what's underneath it. So this is where this final value here comes in. So I can actually set this to something really low, like 0.1, and it makes it very transparent. So if I hover over now, you can see it just gives us this almost like a hover effect, this background shading. So that's good, but it's a square. It's supposed to be a circle. Well, we go back to menu BG and just add a border radius to it. Border radius of 50% is just going to turn it into a circle. Save that, try again, and there we go. That's looking a lot better. So the only thing left now to finish off this header section, this navbar, is the profile picture. So that already also had a class. If we come back into the HTML document, I've given this image a class of profile pic. So I can target that class here. Remember, you just add a full stop and then say profile pic. And there's only a couple of things really that I want to do here. First of all, let's make it round. So we'll go border radius of 50%. That turns it into a circle. And then we'll just change the width of it to 100%. So it takes up the entire available space of the container. And then refresh. And then I just kind of want to nudge it down a little bit. So let's give it a margin at the top of about 6 pixels. And I should nudge it down. Yeah, so now it's a little bit more central. So although the container for it, which is the list item, the LI element, was all in line with each other, the picture itself just sits at the top of, well, the space that's available to it. So if I inspect this, you can kind of see what's going on here. So I needed to give it a little bit of margin from the top there, just to nudge it down and put it in line with everything else. So that about does it for the top, but I've noticed actually that the font has come out quite small. So maybe setting 14 pixels as the overall font wasn't a great idea. So let's go with 16, and it's maybe about right. Try 18, that's too big. Oh yeah, definitely. So 18 is too big. We'll go with 16 for the root of this document. Okay, that's a lot better. Now that this is done, I can start working on the logo and the search bar. One thing that's happened is I've had to change this image up here. So just during my recording, the Unsplashed website where I get the random images from, it seems to have gone down. So I've just temporarily replaced this with just an image that I made. It's literally just a blue square that's styled to look like a circle with my CSS. So no real change here, you don't have to worry about that. Now to begin this next bit here, I'm going to wrap that all within a section. So where I'm going to have the Google image, well, the Google logo, the search bar and the buttons, I'm going to put all of that within one section of its own so I can kind of style it as an individual area. Well, for that I'm going to use the section tag and I'm going to give it a class straight away. Now this class is going to be search wrapper. And then within this, the first thing I want to add in is the logo. So I just need to load that in as an image. I'll say that the source is images / logo.png, and the alt is logo. So that's if it can't be found. And then the class, actually I should stick to the same convention that I've used so far, which is to have the class first. So class is logo. Okay. And let's just close that tag out. And I'm just going to break this up over a few lines because I've done that with the other images, so it just keeps everything neat and consistent. Okay, save that, and there we go, the logo is loaded in. We'll need to center all of that, so we'll get to that in a second. Now I can start on the area underneath. So I'm actually going to put all that within a form tag. So let's create this form tag, and there's obviously going to be the input, so that's the search bar. So I'll create my input, and the input type is text. Now I could give this a class. I'm not actually going to bother because this whole page is only going to have one input. So I'm just going to target this. I'm not going to bother giving it a specific class. So let's save that. And then we can see this little bar has appeared here. Now a couple more things to add, which are the buttons. So still within this form tag, I'm going to have my area for the buttons, but I'm going to actually wrap them within their own div. I'll say div class is buttons, and inside I will have my buttons. So button type equals button, and what do I want it to display? Well, the first one is Google search. Close that tag, there it is, and then just copy this down to create another one. And then this one's going to say I'm feeling lucky. And there we go. So I've got the button set up. It's all pretty much there in terms of content. What I still want to add is these couple of little displays here. So I've got this little magnifying glass and this microphone. Well, let's add those in as well. So they come in before my input. So just at the start of the form tag, I'm going to load them in just the same as a regular image, because that's essentially what they are. I'll split this up, give them a class. The first one is my search, and the source is images / search.png. Now I'm not going to give this an alt, because if it doesn't appear, then I don't really want text to be displayed in this place. And the next one is going to be class of mic. So this is my microphone, and the source is images / mic.png. Okay, so if I save this now, it's going to look a little bit funny. My microphone is, what have I done? Misspelt it. There we go. Okay, so everything is there. I've got all the content, it just doesn't look right. But as far as setting everything out, it's nearly all complete. Looks like I've missed the closing div tag here, so let's just add that in. Always make sure that all the elements, if you open it, make sure that they're all closed. So I've got that. I think I've actually got my form indented a little bit too much. There we go. Okay, so that's better. So I've got my class, my section with the class of search wrapper. Inside it, I've got my image, and then the form, which contains two more images, the input, and then the two buttons within their own div. Okay, so that's good. Now I can start styling this. So I'll start by styling the overall search wrapper. So if I go all the way to the bottom here in my CSS document, I will target my search wrapper class. And first I'll give it a height. So I'll give it a fixed height, and here I'm going to use this unit. So essentially what this is going to do is kind of similar to 60%. Effectively, it's just taking 60% of the viewport height. So regardless of how big the display screen is, it's just going to split it up into 100 individual sections, equal size sections, and then it's going to assign 60 of them to the search wrapper. So that'll fix the height. And then I want to change the display of this. So again, I'm going to go with Flexbox. So I'll display as flex, and remember straight away, it's going to put everything in a row. So it's just stacked up the elements next to each other. So that's fine. Looks terrible, but it's come together. Now let's change the flex direction. So I don't want things to be displayed in a row next to each other. I want them to be on top of each other. So I change this to column. Now they're stacked on top of each other, which is fine. And then I just need to make sure I get my alignment here. So right now it's just made so big because it's trying to stretch itself across the entire available space. So I always get these mixed up. Align items center. There we go. Okay, so that's good. So that's brought everything into the middle. And I also want to vertically align everything as well. So justified content flex start. Let's try this. No. Okay, I may need to come back to that one. I think once I resize all of this stuff, get it all fitted in, it might be a little bit more obvious to see what's actually going on there. Okay, so let's style the input next. Now remember, I didn't give this a class. I could go back and give it a class, but there's only one input on this page, so it doesn't really need that. I'll give it a width first of all. Let's give it a fixed width, 580 pixels. There we go, it's pretty big now. Height of 45 pixels. Okay, that's fine. Now one thing I'm going to do now so I don't forget, but one thing that I do need to add in here is, you notice that the search bar, as soon as I click on it, I'm able to type in from the left hand side. And it's right up against the inside because there is no padding. But of course, when I go to Google and try to type anything, it actually comes up sort of over here a little bit because there's this magnifying glass taking up the space inside. So I need to add a little bit of padding on the inside of that. So we'll say padding left is 50 pixels. And this essentially just creates this little area on the left hand side. It shoves everything in. So this is where my magnifying glass is going to go when I shrink it down and position it here. So now let's set a font size here. Font size is going to be a little bit bigger than the default size for the rest of the page. There we go. And let's round those corners. So border radius, I'll give it a border radius of 45 pixels. There we go, much better. And then change the border. So the border is going to be 1 pixel solid, and we'll go D3, D3, D3. That's much better. So it's nice light gray color there instead. And then there's also one little effect that you get on the Google page. When you move your mouse over it, it kind of creates this little shadow effect in the background of the input. Now I don't have that right now, but that's easy enough to add. So I target the input again, but now I just add hover to it. And what happens when I hover? Well, I just need to add a box shadow to it. So the box shadow is what you just saw, there's that shadow effect. And these are the values that I kind of preset when I was playing around with this earlier. So I'll use RGBA again. So RGBA essentially just means that I will have some control over the transparency of it. So if I set this to 1 here, and then I hover over, you get this solid kind of shadow underneath it. If I set it to 0.1, it's pretty much invisible. You can just about make it out, but I'm going to go for 0.5 just to give a softer shadow there. There we go. Okay, that's looking good, but when I click on it, it's pretty ugly. It outlines the whole thing in this dark black color. I don't really need such a contrast here. So again, what we can do here is target the input and then just add focus. So focus essentially means that it's selected, it's been targeted. And all I'm going to do here is remove that outline. So I still have a border, but I'm not going to have an outline anymore. So nothing happens when I select it, it just displays the border that was already there. So that's the search bar pretty much done. Now I want to get these two buttons inside of it. Well, there's a couple of things I need to do. First, I need to shrink them down, and then I need to actually position them within the search bar. So let's shrink them down first of all. I'd given them classes already, so I can just say search. So that's that magnifying glass, and we'll just say width of 15 pixels. There we go, that's much better, a tiny little magnifying glass. And let's do the same for the microphone. So my mic is going to be width of 15 pixels. And there we go, easy as that. So now I've got these tiny little icons. What's left is to actually shift them inside here. For this, I'm just going to use some relative positioning. Now all of this is wrapped up inside my form element. Remember, the image of the search bar, the magnifying glass and the microphone, the input and the buttons, all of this is within my form tag. So if I just target the form tag and I make that, I give it a relative positioning, then I can move things around relative to that. Okay, so just above the input then, within my search wrapper, so I kind of keep things in order, in the same order as they are within the HTML document, so it's easier to look after them. We'll say form, position is relative. Save that. So nothing initially changes, but now it means that I can assign an absolute position to any of these elements that are within the form, and I can just move them about on a pixel basis. So let's go to my search here first of all. This is the magnifying glass. I'll say position absolute, and then I'll say top is 0, left is 0. Save that, and there we go. Now it's essentially, if I could, let's inspect this. So there is my form element, that rectangle there, and essentially what's happened is you can see the magnifying glass is sitting right in the top left corner of it, because I basically said that I want it to be positioned relative to the position of the form, and I want it to be offset from the top left by 0 pixels, i.e. it needs to be right in the top left corner. So this means that by shifting this, say I add a value here, if I make this 15 pixels, then it's going to be offset 15 pixels from the top. So it moves down the way. Likewise, if I needed to move to the right, I offset it from the left, move it by 15 pixels, and okay, it needs to move over a little bit more. However, when I actually move this microphone, this input is going to move to the left. So right now it's being stacked next to each other. So I'm not going to move or play around with the position of the magnifying glass just yet. Let's get the microphone in the same kind of setup. So for this, I will also say position is absolute. There we go. So you can see, you may have noticed there, this shifted across to the left because this no longer takes up space behind it. And actually the magnifying glass is sitting pretty much where I need it to. So now with the microphone, top of 12 pixels, that shifts it down the way. And then I need to move it all the way to the right. So I actually need to give it more or less the majority of the width of my input. So if I say 540 pixels, it jumps all the way onto the right hand side. And there we go. I've now got my input and I've got it set up with a little magnifying glass and a microphone. And remember, because I added this padding on the inside, I've got the space reserved for it. So the typing is actually going to be sort of inside of it. Now that these are done, let's move on to these two buttons here. Well, both of the buttons, they can just be targeted together. So I'll just look at the button element and that's going to style both of them. First of all, let's set a border. So we'll go 1 pixel, solid, transparent. Save that, and you can see that instantly just disappeared there, but it is still a border. Then let's make them a little bit bigger. So right now they are just as big as the size of the text because there is no padding there. So let's add some padding to them. 8 pixels top and bottom, 12 pixels left and right. So that just opens them out a little bit. Let's change their background color. And we'll go F8, F9, FA, save that, that's a little bit lighter, so that's nice. And again, with these sharp corners that they always come in with by default, let's just smooth those out with a 5 pixel radius. It's actually kind of hard to see because of the white background, but if I just change this to like red, whoops, that's the wrong thing. There we go. Yeah, you can see the radius a bit clearer now, so let's put that back. Okay. And then let's just add a little hover effect. When you move your mouse over here, you get this outline back in. So let's just add that in as well. And I've already showed how to do this. So remember, you just put in the element and add in this hover afterwards. So the hover is going to be a border. Say a border of 1 pixels. Now I already had a border here, but remember I set it to transparent to start with. So now I'm taking that same border, solid, but now I'm actually giving it a color. So whenever I hover over it, that border gets given a color. When the mouse goes off it again, it goes back to transparent. And the other thing I want to do is add a box shadow. So a box shadow will go with 0, 0, 2 pixels, 1 pixel. And so actually very similar to what I did with the input. So this time we'll change the colors a little bit. And 0.5. And there we go. So it's working exactly the same. The only little difference here is that the mouse actually turns into the pointer. So let's add that in as well on hover. So that should be cursor, whoops, not that. Cursor pointer. And there we go. So now it turns into a little hand. Now that's everything pretty much styled except for the positioning. So these buttons are, you can see actually that they're in line with the left hand side of their container. So again, if I bring up the DevTools here, you can see that everything's kind of sitting within this form element. So what I need to do is move the buttons, because they are, remember, they're inside their own div. So this button div, it spans the entire width, but they're positioned on the left hand side. I've never really told them to be sitting nicely in the middle. So let's do that just now. I've got this button styling here. Above it, I also had a class. Remember, that was a div that I can target here with the buttons class. So not button, but buttons to capture both. First of all, I will give it a width. I'll say a width of 350 pixels. At the moment, it just takes the width of its parent, but now it's going to have a fixed width. So if I was to inspect it again, it now... Okay, so after saying that it should be called buttons, I've obviously made a typo in here, and I've given them, yeah, so that's supposed to say buttons. So if we go back to the HTML document, the div class is for buttons plural. I've gone and missed off the S there. Save that again. So if I inspect this, there we go, that's better. So it's just got this additional automatic margin on the right hand side, but let's adjust this now. So I've given that a width, then let's say margin auto. And look, suddenly it's jumped into the middle. So essentially what that's done is, it's quite an easy way of centering things left to right. It just takes all the margin that's free, all the space that's available, and it just splits it up onto the left and right of it. So it's an easy way of centering elements within their parent. Let's also bump this away from the search bar. So we'll give it a margin at the top of 30 pixels. That moves them down a little bit. But the problem is they are still a little bit, I mean, you might just about notice that they're not actually fully centered. So if I inspect this again, you can see what's happened. So you can see there's a little bit of space available here. So although the element, which is my buttons div, is sitting nicely in the middle of its parent, the actual buttons are still on the left hand side. And that's because I've given it a fixed width of 350 pixels. Since the buttons don't fully take that up, they're just sitting there next to each other. So I could try and work out the exact width that this should be to allow me to perfectly position two buttons, and then that's slowly going to move them over closer to the center. So if I make this 340, yeah, you see they slowly shift to the right, and you could kind of just play this guessing game, trying to get them to the right place. But I'm just going to go and add in Flexbox again. So here, I'm just going to set the display to flex. So that's going to take my buttons div and set it to flex display. Okay, so initially nothing actually happens, but you can see the gap has disappeared between them. So it's just taken both of them, put them side by side. And then, this is the good bit, justify content center. There we go, now they're perfectly in the middle. I don't have to worry about the exact pixel sizes anymore. And I'll just add a little gap between them as well. So this is something that you can do with Flexbox and Grid. It automatically just adds in, so 15 pixel is going to be the gap between the two buttons. And now I'm nearly done, but you can see that it's actually not really sitting in the right place. It should be not quite in the middle, but it should be further down on the screen. In my case, it's just coming in right underneath my header. And I can address that by simply styling the body. I've left this a little bit late to do. I should have, I suppose, styled the body a little bit earlier on, but that's what I'm going to do just now. So we'll go all the way back up to the top, above the navbar, and we'll target the body tag. So first of all, I want to set a height for the body. And what I'm going to do here is set it to 100 VH. Now, this is the same value that I used for my search wrapper. And essentially, this is just saying that the height of the body is going to be the entire height of my screen. So if I was to just add a little border around everything, I've done this in some of my other videos as a little way of just seeing what's going on the screen. So if I say solid and red, it wraps everything, wraps every single element in a red outline. So without this, you see that I end up with these two red lines here, or the solid looking red line. But actually, most of that is my search wrapper because I made that 60 VH. And then it's the body. So the body is just as big as everything else within it. But if I change the height of the body, if I say 90 VH, now you can see that's where my search wrapper ends, but this line is extended. So that is the body. If I set it to 100 VH, oops, not 10, and not 1000 either, 100 VH, you can see it just goes down there. And well, I've got this little scroll bar, but it extends to the bottom of the page. So that essentially means that the body is always going to take up the entirety of the screen. And that's good, but I don't want that scroll bar there. There's not really anything on the Google page that needs a scroll bar, so let's get rid of that. I'll say overflow is hidden. So now I have no scroll bar, and this just takes up the full screen. Let's get rid of this border thing. And the other thing I haven't done yet is set my font. So I'll go with font family, and I'll go with Helvetica sans serif. Save that, and the text looks a little bit better. I'm not sure if actually a little bit too big now. Yeah, I think it's maybe a little too big. So previously I'd messed around with it and made it 16, but I think I need to put it back to 14. Yeah, that looks a lot better. So now I can start working on the positioning. And again, like with every other layout I've done, I'm going to use Flexbox. So I'll set my display to flex. And now, as always, by default, that puts everything in line. So it's taking my header and then it's just put the search wrapper next to it. So let's set a flex direction of column. So it stacks up underneath, so that's fine. And then I want to be able to shift this down a bit. So now let's try justifying content and see what options I've got. Now justify content, you may have noticed when I used it earlier for the buttons, justify content align things left to right. But now I'm using it up and down vertically. And that's because it follows the direction. So because I've changed my flex direction to column, justify content is also flipped. So now it applies to the column. So what can we do here? I can go flex start. That's kind of what I've already got. Flex end. That just shifts everything. I could center. So center is fine, but it moves the header with it. So I actually want the header to stay and then this search wrapper to come down. So I think what I'm going to go with, and I don't know if it'll work immediately because I don't have a footer yet. No, it did work perfectly. Is space between. So space between, it essentially just takes the available space and takes the amount of elements that I've got within the body and it just divvies up between them. So that's pretty much exactly what I need it to be, more or less. I think I maybe need to play around with margins a little, but it's coming together. So I think just to space these out, I need to add a little bit of margin to my form element. So remember, underneath this image, all of this stuff is wrapped within a form. And if I come back down here and just say margin top of 30 pixels, there we go, that bumps that away. And it's looking better. So it's actually, it could shift up a little bit if I want to be really, really precise. But I think that maybe because I haven't added the footer in yet. So once I add the footer, that's going to take up some of the available space. So it should manually or automatically, shift all of this up for me. So I'm going to leave it as is and carry on with the footer. And then if I need to tweak it, I can do that at the very end. So speaking of the footer, let's make a start on that now. So there's going to be a footer which actually contains two panels. So you could either do it as one big footer with this line in between, or the way I'm going to do it is split it up into individual panels for the top and the bottom and just stack them on top of each other. And then I'm going to need to use some kind of layout here to kind of similar to what I've done with the header, but now I've got three sections. I've got a left, right, and then I've got this middle bit as well. So let's make a start on that. I'll go back to my HTML, and underneath where I've got my section, this is my section for the search wrapper, I can make a start on the footer. So let's close that tag. And first of all, like I said, I'm going to put those within these little gray panels. So I'm going to give them divs, and it just means I can style them all together. So the first one, I'll say class is panel. And within it, all I'm going to have is just text that says United Kingdom. So that's the one I've got by default, but I guess depending on your location in the world, you're going to have something different there. So that's the first panel pretty much done actually. I can close that div tag out. And then I can make a start on the second div. So that's going to be the second panel, but obviously that's got quite a bit more going on inside it. So let's come down here, open up the next div, give it a class again of panel. So it just inherits, or sorry, it copies the exact same one. So the same styling is going to apply. I'll close that out. And then I need to start populating the items within it. Now the same way as I've done the header links, I'm just going to use an unordered list, and I'll stack these elements inside one list and these ones within another list. So let's start on the first one. Say UL for unordered list, close that tag, and then I just create list items inside it. So the first one is going to be my link. Say it's not going anywhere, so there's no location for it. And then the text inside it is advertising. And then I can just copy this down 2 more times. So this is the left-hand side set of links. Advertising, then it was business, and then the last one was how search works. Whoops. Okay, so we'll close that out. So that takes care of the links on the left-hand side. Now let's add in that little bit in the middle. See what happens if I save this. Okay, so it's coming up here. It's actually stacking up in the right order already. So that's got its own div, and then these 3 have got their own div. So that's actually looking okay for now. Close all these tags. And then I'll have another class or another div with the class of carbon. This is just like that carbon neutral little statement here. I'm putting in a div so that I can put a little leaf in next to it. So div class of carbon, close that out, and then load that image in. So image class is the leaf, and the source is images/leaf.png. And let's give it an alt of leaf. Probably not going to mean a whole lot, but we'll go with that. And add my link here. So the link again doesn't go anywhere. And it says carbon. In fact, is that even a link? Yes, it is. Okay, so carbon neutral since 2007. So we close that link and we close out the div. So that's pretty much everything I need to put in that one. Save that, and still they're stacking on top of each other. We've not given them a layout and told them to go left to right yet. And let's now do the last div. So this actually it's not a div, it's just an unordered list. And this, yeah, I've kind of made a little mistake here, and that's thrown me. So I need to get rid of this div closing tag because all of this stuff is within the same panel. So I indent this. And I've got my div class of panel. Inside there's a UL, so that's the links on the left. Then there's another div for that leaf. Let's break this up. And then it's got this link. And then lastly, all still in the same div. Let's just close it out so I don't get mixed up again. All within that same div, I now have another unordered list. And for now, let's just leave it as is and add in a couple of links. So we'll just copy these 3 down in here. And now the first one was privacy, second one was terms, and then the last one was settings. So that's the 3 links, and we closed that unordered list. The div is closed and the footer is closed. And that's it. That is all the HTML for the footer. So there we go. Now I can start styling it and get it all organized and laid out correctly on the page. So right at the bottom, again, I'm just doing this all in order. So after the buttons, that was all within here. So now I'm onto the footer. Let's target the footer element. And I'll give it a width of 100%. So this is going to spread the entire width of the page. And give it a background color of F2, F2, F2. I've made a mistake there. Missed the 2. There we go. So now that's that gray color, very similar to the gray color that we've got there. And this is split over panels, but these ones are, the bottom one, the top one is okay, but the bottom one has become way too big. So, and also you will have noticed that the layout has kind of messed itself up as well. I've got all the space down here, so the footer isn't really a footer for some reason, but we will come back to that. So let's start styling the panels. I'll target the panel class. And first of all, I'm going to add in that border. So I'll say border bottom. I only want to apply to the bottom side. 1 pixel solid, and I'll go with DDD. And you can see there, that's a very tiny panel. It's just the entire height of that United Kingdom text there. But there's that dividing line in between them. So kind of the same as there. At the moment, my panels aren't the right size. One is way too big and one is way too small. But you can see the little divider there. There is also that same border at the bottom here. But I'm kind of going to cheat because when I move all this down to the bottom, well, that's going to be hidden. So it's just a little cheat way of getting around it and having this divider in between the two. Now let's set a fixed height. So we'll go with 50 pixels. So that makes both of them the same size, but you notice that everything else just spills over from the other one. And to address that, we're going to set the display to flex. Now that by default sets it to flex row. So this one's okay, nothing really changed, but now these ones, they're all stacked up next to each other. So now nothing is spilling over. That's a lot better. And now I want to be able to space these out just as they have on here. So they've kind of got the space in between them. Well, I already did that for the main page, but in the vertical direction. So I can do the same in the horizontal direction. I'll justify content, and I'll go with space between. And there we go. Now it's spaced them out, and it's shifted this one here, and it's just taken all the available space and put it in between them. And let's just pad it out as well. So we'll go with padding of 15 pixels. There we go, because that was right up in the corner. It wasn't looking that good. There we go. So it's a little bit closer. This one is still a little bit too far to the left compared to the others. So we'll style that one as well. So let's target that P element. There is only one paragraph that I've used on the entire page, so I don't need to give it a class. We'll go with color of gray. Actually, that's already... should all they be gray as well? So all those links are black. I think these links might also need to be gray. I don't think they should be black. So I would need to add another class. But you know what? I'm just going to ignore that. I think it looks fine. We'll go with that. And then just give it a little bit of padding from the left-hand side. 15 pixels just to kind of line it up. There we go. So it shifts it in. Maybe not exactly around 14. 13, that's a little bit better. And now I need to start playing around with these. So although I think it maybe is kind of sitting in the right positions, but when you inspect it, it might become a little bit more obvious what's going on. So first of all, this doesn't actually look like it's in the middle really. Yeah, the positioning doesn't look quite right. I think this is too small for the element that it's inside of. You can see it's kind of, first of all, it's not lining up with the leaf, but it doesn't seem to be big enough. It's essentially just the width of what it contains because I haven't given these individual widths. So I think that's why it's not being positioned quite right. And of course, the other thing is that they're not aligned vertically. This one's sitting a bit lower than everything else. So let's make that leaf smaller. Now there's a few things to do here, so I'll just try and do them in order. I'll make the leaf small first of all. Width of 12 pixels. Okay, there we go. Actually, that's pretty much brought it back into center anyway. I think it was just because it was taking so much space. Yeah, now everything's sitting nicely centered. Okay, so that's fine. So now actually, I'm not sure why there is this white space here. I've styled pretty much everything and the layout in the body is correct as far as I can see. So I've given a height of 100. I wonder if it's this browser sync. Oh, okay. I don't know what was going on, but I just refreshed it. Browser sync must have messed something up a little bit. But now that I've refreshed it, it's popped into the right place. So the space between was correct. And the footer is now, so basically it's taking the header, push it to the top, taking the footer, push it to the bottom, and then it's taking the remaining space and giving it to my search wrapper. So let's see how it all looks when we inspect. Yeah, there we go. And of course the search wrapper I'd given a height of 60 VH. So that's how it's kind of automatically being pushed to the start here. But you can see actually that it takes up, there's all this free space underneath it because it takes up 60 VH of the screen. So the only real things I need to do just to finish this off is get the positionings of this right. It looks almost exactly right, but I know that it isn't actually. And it's mostly because of the size of these elements. So these ones, they all take up the amount of room that I've given them. So basically they're as big as the contents of them. But what I actually want to do is have each of these divs or each of these areas have a third of the screen. So that's going to allow me to position them a little bit more accurately. So if I come back down to where I had my panels here, got my panels, and underneath I will target everything that's within the panels. So I just say panel, and then add this, and this just looks at all the child elements of the panel class. And then I'll give them all a flex basis of 33%. So it's kind of like setting a width, but for Flexbox items. So if I set flex basis of 33%, save that, and it's done this again. It's given them all the same size. So now I think they should have a correct width. Yeah, so all the elements now have the same width. So you can see they're spanning a third of the page. So what I can now do, these ones are okay because they're already aligned to the left-hand side. This one I need to center, and these ones I need to move to the right of their container. But first of all, I need to figure out why. Yeah, I guess I'll just have to keep refreshing. That's a bit annoying that the browser sync keeps doing that to me. So the first one is easy to fix. That's this one here, and I'd already given that a class of carbon. So it's after my paragraph, and it's carbon was the div for it, and I'll just say text align center. There we go, moves that into the middle, and then I just need to do these ones, move them to the right hand side. So actually I'll just move all of them because they are within their own container. I'll go back to my unordered list. Remember, all of my unordered lists are actually Flex containers. I've set display Flex to all of my ULs. So that means that by default, I've got some additional functionality within them. So if we go here and just add a class to it, class of right. So this is the one that's right at the bottom. That's weird. When I save my HTML document, it doesn't break it. But when I save my CSS, it breaks it. Strange. So underneath here, I can just add a right class and just use justified content. So I've used quite a few of them already. I used space between, I've used center before. Well, I need to move it to the end. So by default, it's flex start. So if I save it, nothing changes, it's still on the left-hand side. If it changes to flex end, it goes to the end of the flex container. And there we go. That's the Google page pretty much fully cloned. So we've got all the little functionality in there, all the nice hover effects and so on, and everything positioned exactly as we need it to be. So I hope you found that useful, and if you did, please leave a like and feel free to subscribe. Thanks for watching.